Good evening and welcome to another Government of Jersey Facebook Live Ask the Expert event. Tonight we are here with an expert panel who are going to answer your questions and the questions from our audience members on the COVID vaccination programme for 12 to 15-year-olds. It was launched at the end of last month, and already approximately 600 of our island's youngsters have taken up the opportunity to have the jab, but we know that there are still many out there that might be undecided or have some questions that they just want to ask before going ahead and getting the jab. Well, tonight is your opportunity to ask those questions, whether it's whether you're a parent, whether you're a grandparent, a teacher, or a pupil or an islander aged 12 to 16 or yourself. Join the debate tonight, ask those questions and put your mind at rest. How can you ask those questions? It's very, very simple. However you're watching this at the moment, you need to hop over to a website called Slido, S-L-I-D-O. And when you're there, slido.com, as you can see on the screen now, you just simply enter the code 445566. That will bring you into the chat for tonight's debate. You don't need to log on, you don't need to give your name, you don't need to download anything. Pop your question in there and we will see it. It will come through to the iPad that I've got in front of me this evening. By all means, share your comments on Facebook, but if there's a question that you want answering, get over to Slido. And speaking of answering the questions, let me introduce to you tonight's panel. We are joined by some familiar faces and also some new faces. Becky Sherrington, who's the head of the vaccination programme. We've also got Mark Rogers, who's the Director General of Children, Young Persons, Education and Skills. Dr. Ivan Muscat, the Deputy Medical Officer of Health. Dr. Owen Hughes, the Consultant General Paediatrician from the General Hospital, and Deborah McMillan, the Children's Commissioner for Jersey. Good evening to you all. Let's start, Becky. Can you perhaps just set the scene, why we're here tonight, what's happening?
Yeah, so just like the adults, we've wanted to be open and honest and give people the opportunity to ask questions about the vaccinations. We know that information is really important for people's decision making. So this is an opportunity to have an open, honest discussion with both children and parents, and also a broad spectrum of people who are involved in the vaccination programme, to make sure that we can answer those. But also, from the previous Ask the Experts, we've also learnt stuff ourselves. So we've understood perhaps some of the questions that we've not realised have been important. So then it's helped us shape the programme going forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point you make. You're absolutely right. Some of the questions that we get through in these type of discussions and evenings really do help you guys understand what's going on out there, what the feeling is, what the mood is. Mark Rogers, we know there's been an announcement today so that you're changing from next week, I think it is, some of the rules and regulations around COVID in schools. Do you want to just explain a bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So we've been watching very carefully what infection rates are like in the island, and at the moment we're confident that they are low, and they're certainly much lower than they were, say, earlier in the summer. And because of that, we've, through considerable dialogue with other experts, recognised that we can actually alleviate again some of the restrictions that we've had around youngsters. So in particular, we're going to make it easier if you're identified as a direct contact. Direct contacts have been quite controversial. They've been very disruptive. So the first change that's going to happen from tomorrow is that actually you don't need to immediately leave school if you're a direct contact. You'll be given up to 3 days in which you'll be offered an appointment, and there'll be some flexibility around that. Of course, you will need to leave if you're symptomatic, but if you're not, you've got longer to get a test. And then what we're going to ask for also is greater use of lateral flow tests as well, just to kind of keep checking, so that for a 10-day period, we just know that you're checking, making sure that everything's okay. We're also recognising that this time of year there's much more focus on performances in schools. Classically, there might be nativities in some of our schools, but there'll be other productions. So we're also just issuing some new guidance to help schools feel confident about being able to hold rehearsals and hopefully performances a little later in the year, given how important they are for youngsters socially, but actually they're just a big event in the school calendar, and we missed them last year.
And do you think even there might be a chance for parents to go into the school and watch some of these performances and events?
Yep, so the guidance that we're offering schools tells them how they can have a COVID-safe school production, which can include parents and carers who want to go along and watch.
Great stuff. So
Yeah.
we can all look forward to that, hopefully.
Thank you.
Dr. Muscat, just based on what Mark has said there, obviously cases are dropping in schools enough that you've relaxed some of the regulations. Why is it then that we're still going to go ahead and vaccinate some of our youngsters?
It's important, I think, to use all the weapons, if you like, at our disposal to keep COVID at bay, to keep COVID at bay as we go into winter, as we go into a season where there's going to be more respiratory tract infections, which include COVID, but include as well, of course, influenza and RSV. And as you know, we are vaccinating against influenza across the board, and that program started in schools some days ago now. So we don't know exactly what winter is going to bring, but we do think that there will be greater pressure from flu and RSV and other viruses, and that COVID will be with us over winter and may increase over winter, because that's what respiratory viruses do over the winter period. So protecting ourselves now to enjoy the benefits that Mark has mentioned, and to continue to do so uninterrupted over the coming scholastic year, is a very reasonable thing to do.
It's all about getting prepared.
It is indeed.
Understood. Dr. Hughes, what's the prognosis for children that might catch COVID?
Prognosis in terms of the health effects from catching coronavirus, catching COVID are, I think as everybody knows now, pretty good. It is not a disease that has been really affecting young people in terms of getting them in terms of getting them hospitalised, needing to go to intensive care, or even suffering badly from symptoms. I think Ivan will probably hopefully correct me throughout this, but asymptomatic COVID in children is about 50% of the time, a third to half. So lots of the time you don't even know that you've got it as a child, which is why there was worry about how much it was circulating in schools and how they were contributing to how young people were contributing to the pandemic. And I mean that's something that I'd like to think that the rollout of the vaccination will make people feel a bit more confident that there isn't that sense that children are responsible for spreading the virus so much anymore. So that's one benefit. But in terms of the prognosis and the risks to children's health, actually catching coronavirus, they don't have the same effects on the lungs as we've seen in the elderly population who are now almost all vaccinated, luckily, over here. It's worth mentioning, though, there is one fairly novel or new disease which has become apparent that is affecting young people more than the elderly. It's this hyperinflammatory condition which is called, I'll give you the acronym, it's PIMS-TS. It's a pediatric inflammatory multi-system syndrome temporarily associated with COVID. We don't really know why it seems to affect young people, but I think about half of the people that have been affected by it have been
in plain English, what is that? How does that affect?
So it's a severe, it's like a septic shock basically. So it's like as if you've got a severe infection. It causes your blood pressure to fall. You can have a respiratory failure, really severe, really great difficulty breathing, and you can need a lot of support, including needing to be in intensive care at its severe end. Mm-hmm. And the milder form, often high fevers, a rash can come and go. You can feel very, very poorly. And there's often no other signs of infection. Well, there shouldn't be to attribute to it. And I think the diagnostic criteria involve having had a recent COVID infection or preceding COVID infection, or at least contact with someone with coronavirus. So that is a condition which is a new thing, and I think it's worth bringing up today if anyone had any questions about it. Because
have we seen any instances of that in the island yet?
Well, we suspect we may have seen one, possibly two. It's similar to a disease called Kawasaki's disease, which affects younger children, which is a similar sort of inflammatory condition. But no, fortunately, it's difficult in a small population as ours, as we have over here, to draw too many conclusions, because rare things can happen here as they can happen anywhere. But fortunately, no, we haven't had lots of problems with it.
But certainly something that's on the radar.
Yeah, something on our radar as in the hospital. Yeah,
indeed. Deborah McMillan, Children's Commissioner. Obviously, there are many islanders out there still with lots of questions about this particular age group being jabbed, to the extent that there's even a bit of controversy. We've seen people campaigning, both for and against. How do we square that, or how do you square that circle of children having the right to have a jab or to make that decision, but also they're of an age when there is parental responsibility and the parent should be making that decision? Where does that sit?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Carl. What's really important here is that young people are being given choice, because us as adults have choice about whether or not we have the vaccination. And it's only right that our young people have that choice as well. But in order to make that choice and for that decision to be informed, they've got to have access to information, which is great that we've got our young audience here today armed with questions, and some of them quite complicated, and rightly so, because they have a right to access good quality information so they can make that choice. And what we're saying to young people is have a chat with those people that you live with, whether it's mum and dad, carers, whoever, and have that conversation and make your decision about whether or not you want to have the vaccination. But, there may be times where you don't agree. One of you might say, I'd like to have the vaccination, and mum might say, well, I'm not sure. And what we would say there is have that conversation, ask your GP for advice or ask other experts for advice so that you can together agree. But what's really important is that as young people, you do have the right to disagree with your parent. And there might be occasions where you can say, I want the vaccination, and a parent might say, I disagree. But if you're under 16 and yet you fully understood the situation and you've looked at all the evidence and you've come to a conclusion and you can demonstrate how you came to that conclusion, then you can go ahead and have the vaccination without a parent. But I don't think that situation has arisen yet. We doubt that it will. And it's great that we've got this sort of event where young people can access that good quality information.
It's really a really interesting sort of side issue alongside this that I think we'll maybe delve into a little bit deeper. As Deborah alluded to there, we are really, really pleased and excited tonight that we've got, first of all, we've got a live audience for the first time, but also it's made up of youngsters who have come armed with some really tricky questions, I believe, for our panel members. So, whilst you at home continue to send in your questions, and we will get to them, what we're going to do now is go down and join our audience and invite them to ask some questions to the panel members here. So let's start with you. If you want to stand up and tell us your name and which school you go to.
My name's Taylor J and I go to Lekeneve.
Okay, Taylor, well, could you tell us what your first question is?
My first question is, isn't it important for young people to build their immunity, and does the COVID-19 vaccine support our natural immunity?
Okay, so who wants to answer that? Would that be one for Dr. Hughes, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. It is important for you to build your immunity, and you'll be doing that, every day of the year. You'll be exposed to antigens which are processed by your body and produce and are recognised as foreign, and your body produces antibodies against those things, and that's a process which is going on all the time. When you're exposed to viruses like the influenza virus or the common cold virus, your body mounts an immune response and gets it ready for when it's exposed to that virus again, so that it tackles it more quickly and more effectively, so you don't become as ill next time. And that's one of the reasons. That's one of the ways which the vaccination programs that we have for childhood infections, like rubella, measles, and the annual vaccinations that you get, that you've probably been getting at school for influenza, help to reduce the likelihood of you becoming more seriously ill when you are exposed to that virus, and also protecting other people around you that might not have mounted as good a response as you have, or are more at risk. So that's it. I mean, that is a natural thing which is going on all the time. The virus, I don't know whether you wanted me to talk about how it works, or because you may have heard it's a slightly new type of vaccine, isn't it, which is being delivered by the in the COVID vaccine. But it basically replicates what your body's doing when it's exposed to these viruses naturally, but without the risk of you actually catching the disease with the vaccination. So I hope that answers your question, but my colleagues here, especially Dr. Muscat, might have something he wanted to add.
Dr. Muscat?
I think in summary, your body is always creating immune responses. It can create immune responses in one of two ways. It can either create an immune response in relation to natural infection, which means you have to suffer the effects of that infection before you become immune, or you can be vaccinated against that infection, in which case the vaccine gives you that immunity quickly without you having to suffer the effect of the natural infection and the consequences of that natural infection. And what we currently have is the opportunity to vaccinate against COVID to bypass the problems associated with natural infection due to COVID.
So when you say immunity, when you build up your immunity, that means they build up their own protection, ready to fight off COVID if they should come into contact with it.
That can happen in one of two ways, either through getting the infection or through getting vaccinated. If you've had the natural infection and you get, even if you don't know about it because it's been asymptomatic, and you get vaccinated, that will simply further bolster, further reinforce your immunity. And in fact, the immunity through two exposures, one through natural infection, one through vaccination, will give you a much better immunity than just one exposure alone. So immunity is built through two ways: natural infection or vaccination. Vaccination avoids the problems of natural infection. And we've done this with a whole host of diseases: meningitis, diphtheria, tetanus, polio, smallpox, rubella. A whole huge range of vaccines have been developed so that people, children and adults can develop immunity without suffering the effects of natural infection and the consequences of natural infection.
And just briefly, whilst we've touched on that subject, Dr. Muscat, if a child has had COVID, are they still being recommended to go and have the jab as well?
Yes, as we do with adults.
Right, that's just the same. Right, brilliant. Thank you for your question, Taylor. Do you want to stand up and tell us your name and what school you go to?
I'm Maisie and I go to Llanelvey School.
And what year are you in at Llanelvey?
I'm in Year 8.
Year 8. Right, what's your question for the panel, Maisie?
What is the benefit of the vaccine for me if I'm healthy and young?
Dr. Muscat, do you want to have a go at that one?
So if you're healthy and young, the benefit is not as great as if you're unhealthy or old, but there is still a benefit. It is just numerically not so great. So if you look at the number of children aged 5 to 14 who end up in hospital as a result of infection, that's about 100 per million children in the second wave, and it doubled to about 200 per million with the third wave, which was due to Delta, which is more virulent, which is why we saw so many cases in school in the summer term of earlier on this year. COVID in children and healthy children is milder than in older age groups and in people with underlying conditions, but it still can cause hospitalization. And very importantly, it disrupts their normal day-to-day life. It disrupts them going their school days. And schooling is very important, not just in terms of education, but in terms of well-being, in terms of their societal interaction with other children, with teachers, with the world as a whole. And we've all heard how disruptive COVID can be to children's day-to-day life when we lived through large outbreaks of COVID earlier on this year. So the vaccine, together with other measures, will all help reduce that threat as we go forward, not just to the health of the individual child, but also their general well-being.
Okay, does that answer your question, Maisie? That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Let's step forward. We can see. Would you want to stand up, young man? Tell us what your name is.
Hi, my name's Gabriel.
Okay, well, we can see you go to Vic College. What year
Yes,
are
I
you
go
in?
to Victoria College. I'm in year 9.
Right. What's your question for the panel members?
So my first question is, what short-term and long-term trials have been conducted to show I'm going to be safe in 1 day, 1 year, 5 years, or for the rest of my life if I have the coronavirus vaccine?
That's a really good question. Who wants to pick that one up? Right. Let me pick somebody. Let's go for Dr. Hughes. Go on.
Okay, so long-term complications of vaccines are, I think they're essentially vanishingly rare. The complications that you get from vaccination generally occur, within a few days. There's there's the incredibly rare instance of anaphylaxis to vaccinations. And we do vaccinations in healthcare settings just in case that is the case. But yes, most of the short-term complications happen within a few days or within the first week or two, and typically they're the sort of reaction that I'm having right now because I had my flu vaccine this morning. A bit of a sore arm, usually worse the next day. Sometimes a little bit of a low-grade temperature. You can sometimes get a little bit of aching muscles and feeling a little bit of flu-like symptoms. Those are the common sort of 1 in 10 sort of side effects of the COVID vaccines. That I think all three. The longer term, much rarer type of vaccine side effects and complications we have seen. And you may have heard about the rare instance of this thing called myocarditis, which has been picked up. This isn't something which became apparent, which was obvious when the original trials were conducted, the randomized controlled trials to see if the vaccine works or not. It was deemed to be perfectly safe then, and there was no side effects that were picked up or complications in young people in the trials. But then when you roll out the vaccine to millions and millions of people, you can pick up these tiny little, very, very, very rare complications.
Could you just explain what myocarditis is?
Yeah, sure. It is essentially an inflammation of the muscle of the heart. It can occur when you get infections with things like adenovirus or Coxsackie virus. Lots of these common cold, flu-like viruses which go around and circulate through our society can cause myocarditis. And actually, they're much worse than the type of myocarditis that has been detected as a very rare complication of the COVID vaccine. It can cause a little bit of shortness of breath, sometimes some chest pain, and sometimes you can feel your heart beating irregularly. And I think if you read the information that you're given when you have the vaccine, especially if you're a young male, generally slightly older than you, Gabriel, you are warned about that side effect, just so that you know.
But, I mean, should Gabriel be worried about having the vaccine? He's worried about the long-term effects.
Yeah. Essentially, beyond the time where your body's processed the vaccine and you've developed an immunity, there are no known long-term complications, and that's across the board for almost every vaccine that's in use at the moment. So you don't need to worry about anything really down the line. But if you are, luckily we have a really good, robust system in place for detecting even these extremely rare side effects, and we will let you know about them as and when they become apparent, just like you've been told today, and we've all been made aware of this very small risk of myocarditis. But I think the message to you, Gabriel, is these are very, very safe vaccines, and the disease is worse. Even though COVID-19 is very low risk to you, the risks from the disease are worse than the risks from the vaccine.
Okay, that's a strong message at the end there. Thank you, Gabriel. We'll come back to you. Oh yeah, of course you can. Yeah, sure.
Just to add on to what I was saying, how do I know that I'm not going to have a serious health incident or a big thing that happens to lots of, like me and my friends, in, let's say, 5 years, because we don't, COVID's not been around for more than 3 years. So how do I know in 5 years I'm going to be safe and something big's not going to pop up?
Can you give me an example of the kind of thing that you're worried about happening?
I don't know. I don't know, a problem that we could have, some sort of information, some sort of blockage.
Or a serious side effect, I suppose.
Yes, something a bit serious in 5 years.
Related to the vaccination?
Yeah, related to the vaccination.
Well, I think I can only reassure you based on what we know about other vaccines. Dr. Muscat will hopefully be able to fill in a little bit more, but all of the vaccinations that have been in use for many generations now to my knowledge, there are no later term effects. 5 years down the line, as I say, the overwhelming majority, in fact, almost all of any of the side effects of vaccinations come in that first few days to 2 weeks.
I mean, I was just going to pass that over to Dr. Muscat there. We could rephrase it a little bit as well to say, of all of the vaccines that we give children, do we ever see side effects come through in later life? And will this jab be any different?
The answer is no, you don't see the side effects emerging years on. If you are going to see any side effects, you see them there and then, within a few days, within a couple of weeks at the most. And it's worthwhile adding some numbers to this, if I may. So the risk, as we were saying earlier, of being admitted to hospital with COVID in children is with Delta is about 200 per million. The risk of myocarditis is about 10 per million doses given for the first dose. So if you translate that into the numbers likely to be seen in Jersey, we've got about 4,000 children between the ages of 12 and 15. And if all of them are vaccinated, then we would be preventing some one hospital admission per year. And we could be seeing one episode of myocarditis every 25 years. So we are talking about a significant difference in risk. But what is really important is to emphasize what my colleague, Dr. Hughes, has emphasized, and that is that the myocarditis seen with the vaccination is very mild indeed, compared with the myocarditis seen due to a viral infection, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And the incidence of viral myocarditis due to COVID infection, it can be due to other viruses, is about 0.7 to 3%. And unfortunately, very recently, we've heard about a young 15-year-old girl in the south coast of England who died within days of getting COVID because of myocarditis. So it is a real entity. That is COVID infection, myocarditis, not vaccine.
That's what I was just going to ask to clarify that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Take a seat, Gabriel. Right. Let's have a wander over here. Do you want to stand up and tell us who you are?
Happily, I'm Ollie. I go to Le Kennevet, but I'm here with Youth Parliament today.
Okay. What's your question, Ollie?
My question is, certainly just before I got the jab, I've had the jab, there wasn't very much to really push me into getting it in school. I got it through my parents really recommending it to me, and I'm quite knowledgeable with this sort of thing. I like reading the news and all. Mm-hmm. So it was just a matter of time for me. But certainly in school, there's no banner ads, there's no assemblies, there's no in touch about it either. Are there any plans to get it out into schools? The word around a lot more, because right now I haven't really noticed anything. Certainly in my school.
Let's start with Becky Sherrington. Maybe move over to Mark Rogers. Becky, how would you answer that?
That's a brilliant point. It's a really, really good point. So it was a question that we had. How do we do it? We haven't done it before. We've got lots of experience of giving flu vaccines in schools, but this is slightly different. So we all sat round a table and we said, right, what's the best way to do it? And in answer, there probably isn't one single right way to do it. And I still think, have we done it right? Have we done it wrong? But the decision to not go into schools to do it was based on just a couple of factors. So the first was, I'm a mum, and I would probably want to attend the vaccination with my children. So that was probably quite a strong one. And I think there's probably a lot of parents who would quite want to go with their children to have the vaccination because they want to check that they're okay and also ask a few questions. So if we did it in schools, it would cause quite a lot of disruption if all the parents turned up, wanted to ask questions and be there at the time. So that was the one thing. And then the second is that the medicines regulator at the moment is still recommending a 15-minute wait after your vaccination. So if we were to come into schools, and at the moment the flu vaccine is given a little spray up your nose, so it's really quick. You go in, have your flu, up your nose, off you go. So if we give you a vaccination in your arm and you've got to wait for 15 minutes, and we want to do that in big numbers, that's going to cause quite a lot of a headache to the teachers and disrupt your lessons. And I know that a lot of lessons have been disrupted over the last year. So do we really want to give a vaccine to stop disruptions to schools but then disrupt schools? Probably not the best. So we thought we'll do it in the vaccination centre. And so that gives the parents the chance to come with you. It means you've got 15 minutes to chill out and wait and be kept an eye on without disrupting your school. It probably does mean it's a bit slower. So you're right, there's probably a much quicker way to come into schools and just do it en masse. But as I say, I think that it benefits the parents and it gives us this 15-minute wait and doesn't disrupt your schools. Your second point about information, we can give out information. So we've sent out an email to all parents and to school children. So we've sent that out, so Dr Muscat has sent that out. Our emails, children all read emails, probably not. So if people have got information or ideas, and perhaps we could work with the Jersey Youth Parliament about even more better ways to communicate with children.
Mark, just let me interrupt there, Becky. Mark Rogers, I mean, what about contacting children directly? Is that a no-no for the department?
So our preference is to do it through schools.
Sorry, I meant directly through schools, but to the children. So the teachers will be asked to hand leaflets out to children. Would that be seen as a...
So I think our preference would be to do both. So it's both and, not either or. So I think we want parents and carers to know, and at the same time, clearly, for youngsters to get the same information. So that is important. What I'm hearing is, and I know she's watching, I've got a head of communications who will be listening very carefully to you. And we'll be thinking about whether we need to do a little bit more social media activity, particularly kind of small, short video clips, which we've done about other issues in the past. So rather than take what you've said as a question and try and answer it, I'm kind of taking what you said as feedback about these are things we should think about doing more of, so that the message is just more frequent, clearer, etc., etc. So it's just really helpful to hear that, because we've done some stuff, but we clearly haven't done enough stuff. If you're going, it feels a bit low profile.
I mean, Deborah McMillan, is there a risk that Ollie and his friends are wholly reliant on their parents sharing that information with them, and perhaps some parents may decide not to pass that on?
Yeah, absolutely. As young people, you've got the right to access this information, and for it to be in a format that, first of all, makes you want to read it, and secondly, that you can understand. So it would be great to see this information in different languages, because not all of our young people on the island can necessarily read good English, nor parents, but also for those young people that need some extra help in reading. But also, when we talk to young people about content, they want to see video content. You want to listen and hear rather than read leaflets. I think leaflets are sort of quite old-fashioned now. And so I think Mark's correct. It would be good to be thinking about those social media platforms that are safe for older teens to read and access, that makes video content a bit more exciting for you.
I mean, Ollie, what's the best way, do you think, that the messages could come through to people your age?
I think leaflets are kind of, people don't really read them anymore. People chuck them out the window basically now. Unless you get the ones from Highlands, they're really cool because you can flip them. But anyways, the main thing is sort of you can do a lot of social media things nowadays. You can get little ads just pop up. You get them a lot with the UK government now on, I'm not on it, but TikTok. That's a big one. but they're quite good at targeting, particularly with the contact tracing scheme they have over there. But yeah, I think another thing is having assemblies in schools, just having banners in schools. Anything. We used to have an Eat Well banner in our canteen, and I used to read it when I was sitting in line, and it just having that there was something for me to look at, and I remembered it. You know, I'm talking about it today. I remembered it. Radio jingles. I mean, obviously they're kind of annoying, but you know what I mean. There is so much you can do. Any ad campaign or sort of service within the government that will help out with that. They know their stuff, and if you talk to them and kids about this sort of thing, they will know exactly where they get all their content from and how they remember it.
I mean, let's just do a quick show of hands here. How many of our audience members use Facebook? Okay, so we've got half a hand there. What about TikTok? 2. Instagram? Anything else out there that we don't know about? Any other kind of platform? Snapchat? Anybody? Yeah. Right, so that might be the route. Okay, how many of you listen to the radio? Okay, read the paper? Okay, so maybe Snapchat is the way. Right, so that's an unscientific straw poll there, but that's you've raised a really, really interesting point, Ollie. Thank you so much, and I'm sure the panel have learned something there. All right, thank you. Right, do you want to stand up and introduce yourself? We can see that you go to Vic College. What's your name?
I'm Ed Mulholland. I'm year 9.
Year 9, okay. Ed, what's your question for the panel?
Do you know if the vaccine programme is going to continue in the future, for example, 5 years? And if so, will children ages 12 to 15 get a second jab, or will there just be one?
Dr. Muscat? It's a really good question from Ed there.
It is indeed, and it's a question that people are trying to answer as we speak, really, because we don't know. So people are continuing to look at the immune response that people have developed to vaccination to see whether it's waning or not, and if it is, then that would indicate that a continued vaccination program is appropriate at the time. And indeed, that is the way they decided to give a third dose in people aged over 50 or at risk this autumn, and that's happening now. So they looked at the immune response that we talked about earlier in people with time. They noticed that the immunity was waning, and that therefore going into winter it was going to be really important to vaccinate those whose immune system is most likely to wane the most. So it is, we're continuing to learn. We're at school as well. We're continuing to learn about the virus and how to handle it. And the only way to do that is to study all the information available to us, and that will help us determine whether to continue with vaccine boosters as we go forward.
And that's vaccine boosters, particularly in this age group.
And of course, we're talking about vaccination as a whole, both in adults and in children. The waning of immunity is going to be much slower in children, but people are studying it, again, with a view to determining if a second dose is needed and if indeed further doses are needed further down the line. We just don't know, but we are on it.
Okay, Ed, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great, right, well, thank you very much. What we'll do briefly now is just remind you, if you're watching, how you can get involved this evening. You can hop over to a website called Slido, S-L-I-D-O, slido.com. When you get in there, you'll be immediately asked to enter a code. That code is 445566. You'll see all of the questions coming in. You can enter your question in there. You don't need to give your name, put any personal details in, or download anything, and then it will pop up on the iPad in front of me. So rather than ask your question in the Facebook chat, put it in Slido, and I will get it through onto the iPad here. Now, one of the questions I saw earlier probably is a question for you, Becky Sherrington. Is there a plan to give our youngsters this age a QR code or a certificate or something for when they go out and about, when they maybe want to go away for half term or Christmas holidays? Has that been thought about yet?
So it has. And the 12 to 15-year-olds, we are looking at providing a QR code, but at the moment that's still in development. So they will be announcing that very shortly. So it's not totally in my area of policy, but the digital team are looking at being able to provide a QR code for those who've had the vaccine who want to be able to demonstrate it when they go off on holiday. So that should be announced very shortly.
So this might be a QR code that they can perhaps carry around on a phone or something rather than a paper certificate.
That's right, yes.
Fine. And is that right, Mark? Are you thinking about any other ways of our youngsters sort of proving that they've had their jabs, or maybe they haven't got their jabs, or are there plans to restrict movement of children that may not have had the jab?
So not restrict movement in that sense, but there will be different arrangements potentially in the future depending on vaccination status, as we know that there are already for adults. But at this stage there are no, for example around travel particularly, there are no planned changes at the moment. We're still in a situation where this vaccination programme is in its early stages, albeit going successfully. So we're still maintaining a kind of cautious approach around testing at the border. And I can just reiterate what Becky says around digital solutions. The preference is always going to be a digital solution that you can have on a smartphone or some kind of other device, so you can just carry it around with you and have easy access to it.
I mean, we've seen business leaders around the world and also in certain countries that certain people may be refused to be allowed to go to work if they've not had a vaccine. Could there be a situation where a child in Jersey might not be allowed to go to school if they haven't had a vaccine?
So at this moment in time, I am not imagining such a situation, and I have the Children's Commissioner very firmly in my right eye, because she and I would be foursquare on the right to education and making sure that everything was done to ensure that that right was fulfilled.
Deborah McMillan, you agree with that?
Absolutely. Just to make sure that all children and young people understand that if you choose not to have the vaccination, then that doesn't put you at a disadvantage in terms of going to school. You will not be told that you cannot go to school or access certain activities because you've chosen not to have the vaccination. It's really important to understand that, because otherwise it's discrimination, and you have a right not to be discriminated against. And Mark's quite right that should that decision be made, we would be having very strong words.
Right, that's pretty firm there. Dr. Hughes, I mean, who will be held, a question here that's come in on Slido, who's going to be held accountable if a young person was to have an adverse reaction to a jab? Whose fault is that?
Well, I can't see anybody, particularly one person or agency, being held accountable. It's there are mechanisms in place for reporting adverse events. In the UK, we have a yellow card reporting system that the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Agency have in place, and that the same thing applies for medicines as it does for vaccinations. And any adverse event, whether it's related to the vaccine or not, often you don't know, do you? Because it's just you have a vaccine and then some negative health event occurs contemporaneously. They're all reported, and as the millions of vaccines are administered, a body of evidence is gathered, and those are all examined. And if a pattern emerges, then measures are taken. But on an individual basis, there's no blame as such. Of course, we trust these agencies, don't we? I hope to be doing their job. And hopefully you'll be reassured that there are these reporting mechanisms in place, so that even the extremely rare side effect is captured and we're made aware of them.
Fine, thank you. Dr. Muscat, one for you here that came in yesterday. If a young teen has had a first dose, how long is this expected to last? Seeing fully vaccinated adults are being offered boosters after 6 months. I know we briefly touched on the reasons behind the boosters earlier, but I mean, what's the thinking at the moment with this jab? How long is it before this age group might need to be called back again?
That is being explored. we know that the waning of immunity in young people is much lower than in adults and in people with underlying disease. So we can't simply say that it's 6 months for adults and therefore it's going to be 6 months for children, because children are different. But we can keep an eye on what's happening with the vaccine efficacy in children and then determine if and when a booster is needed. To that mix, and that's what we did with adults, of course, now, but that's what the world did with adults. To that mix, we need to add that circulating virus, which is ongoing, will help boost the immunity of people as well. So there is that dynamic in the real world which needs to be taken into account. But that circulating virus that we're seeing is causing much less damage than it used to, because many people are now vaccinated or fully vaccinated and therefore are fending off severe disease. So that will also come into play. We're following children up to determine if and when they need a booster.
Okay. Right, thank you for that, Doctor. So we'll turn back to our studio audience, who I know have got some more questions. You want to jump up, Taylor, and ask? I know you've got a question there for Dr. Muscat, I think.
Have any under 15-year-olds died from the COVID vaccine, and if so, why?
I am unaware of any under 15-year-olds that have died from COVID vaccine. I am aware, though, of 5 to 14-year-olds who have died from COVID over the last year in the UK, and that is well published. There have been deaths due to vaccination worldwide, but not in children, as far as I know. There have been no deaths due to myocarditis in the United States. There have been 5 deaths due to myocarditis in the European Union due to the Pfizer vaccine. But all those deaths occurred in very old people with underlying comorbidities, not in children. And there has been 1 death in a middle-aged person in New Zealand due to Pfizer myocarditis. But we're talking about a global scale here. And as I said earlier, the risk of myocarditis in 12 to 15-year-olds being seen in Jersey is 1 in 25 years. So
what the message we're trying to get out to the islands youngsters watching this is, out of the millions and millions of people around the world, we've seen just a few deaths.
But not in children under the age of 15. We've only seen that in old people with underlying conditions. So it's not in the under 15s, which was the question.
Okay, Taylor, you happy with that? Right. Now, I believe you might have another question as well.
How is all the plastic used for the vaccines being recycled?
Ooh, let's throw that Becky's way. That's a good, tricky question.
So we have to get rid of all medical waste in the same way. So we have to incinerate it. So we have to make sure that there's health and safety, and we'll make sure that we get rid of it in the approved way, like we would with all medical products. I think it's a really good question, though, and I think that as we start to learn more about the way we've dealt with COVID and also the way we deal with medical waste, I think is a really good question. I think is something that needs to be looked at as we go forward. So that's a really good question.
So, Maisie, obviously you care about the environment. What do you think maybe we could do with the plastic that's been used for the vaccines?
We could recycle it or something. So maybe we could use it again or something.
What, use it maybe for another vaccine?
Yeah.
Is that something that is medically possible, Dr. Muscat? Because obviously there must be millions and millions of billions of these vaccines being made around the globe.
Indeed. So people need to look at ensuring that there isn't a cross-contamination or cross-infection risk. cross-contamination of chemicals, drugs, vaccines on the one hand, or cross-infection on the other. And if that's doable, then it may be possible to recycle plastic. Recycling of plastic doesn't mean the same syringe that was used on person A is used on person B. Of course, recycling means taking the plastic syringe, making sure it's absolutely sterilized, broken down to its component molecules, if you like, and then regenerated into plastic for further use. And that whole process will completely separate first usage from second usage. If that is possible, I'm not a chemist, so I don't know how feasible all that is, but it will be recycling in the same way as we recycle other plastics. Not all plastics, as I understand it, are recyclable. That's another factor that needs to be taken into account. But it's something to think about.
Do you do chemistry at school, Maisie?
Yes.
Right, well, you need to invent a way of making this possible and...
You need to teach us.
Exactly, and become a millionaire overnight. So let's copyright that idea before anybody else pinches it. Right, how about you, Gabriel? Do you have another question?
Yes, I do. So I've already had the Delta variant of COVID. I had it, it's been nearly 2 months now. And
how did this, let me stop you there, how did it affect you?
So I had no symptoms at all.
Okay, so how did you find out that you had it?
So my whole family had, my mum and dad had really bad symptoms. My brother and sister, they had slight symptoms, but I had absolutely nothing.
Okay.
So I was just wondering why I would be persuaded to have, a synthetic man-made substance or vaccine, which could cause potential harming side effects. Why would I have it if I've already had the natural way of antibodies?
Dr. Hughes?
Well, I think we've probably covered this already. Dr. Muscat was making the point earlier that it's nice that you've not had any symptoms when you've had COVID. I'm pleased to hear that, and I hope the rest of your family are all recovered. You will. What was it? 2 months ago, or?
It was a couple of months ago.
Couple of months ago.
Couple of months.
So you should still. Well, we should hopefully still be protected by your natural immunity, but we don't know as much about how well the immunity lasts following wild acquired COVID than compared to what we know about how the immunity wanes through vaccination. And as the wild COVID in the community starts to reduce, you're going to have fewer opportunities to boost your own immunity, and as your body is exposed to the virus again, it should recognise it as foreign, and you should have a little surge of antibodies which then protect you for a little bit longer. And that's exactly what the COVID vaccine would do for you. It would prolong your protection against coronavirus. And hopefully, if you wanted to choose to have, if you haven't already, the vaccine, it would protect you through the upcoming flu and RSV season, at the very least, and until we know when and how best to vaccinate, in the future, which is yet to be decided.
Does that reassure you, Gabriel?
Well, yes, sort of. But as obviously you were talking about before, if a new variant of the virus does come out and we need boosters, does that mean we're going to have more chemicals in our body that could cause more side effects?
Well, I'll try and address that worry about chemicals in your body. We don't worry about lots of chemicals that we use all the time. We're dependent on chemicals for many of the luxuries in our lives, actually. And the components that are helping to deliver the virus are, they are broken down in a very, very short space of time. And there is nothing else left really that is inside your body that is going to be causing you any harm. So I think you should, hopefully take away from this conversation, hopefully, with what Dr. Muscat can add, the worry about having some, foreign, unnatural chemicals left behind in your body from the vaccination aren't really a real problem, Gabriel, and you really, in my view, shouldn't worry about it.
Deborah McMillan, Children's Commissioner. Obviously, Gabriel, there's going to be many other island youngsters facing the same kind of dilemma, and I've got some worries. We can hear the medical response. What about the kind of the ethical response? Is this the sort of thing that you're perhaps hearing that children are worried about? And if so, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, quite rightly, Gabriel's concerned about having a vaccine and putting something into his body which, if coronavirus didn't exist, we wouldn't have to do. But we need to be thinking about all of the risks. So you had a very mild or an asymptomatic response, but nevertheless, you had to stay off school and you weren't able to see your friends or join in with activities. And you know what we heard from young people directly during the height of the pandemic, from 1,000 young people, they talked to us about their mental health and well-being and how not being able to go to school, not being able to go to scouts or whatever drama club they used to go to, not being able to see their friends or their relatives had a massive impact on them. And some young people are really struggling with that now to come to terms with it. And that's why we're saying, don't just think about the medical impact of having this vaccine. Think about all those other things that you might be prevented from doing if you catch COVID, because you won't be allowed to go to school if you are tested positive, because we don't want it to transfer to other children. We need to manage that risk. So I think our message is, think about all of the things that you like to do, Gabriel, and you know, when you're making your decision about whether or not to have the vaccine, don't just think about the impact on your physical health, but on your wider health as well.
I mean, how was it for you? I presume you had to isolate for 2 weeks?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
it was during COVID. It was during the summer holidays, so I missed some of the summer holidays.
Which is probably worse than missing some of school in a way.
Yes.
And how did you find that?
It was difficult, especially considering my whole family we had to stay in for longer. Because it was one and then the other and then the other. So
right. So it's like a knock-on effect, and you were all okay. And what do you think about the answers you've received there? Do they help reassure you a little bit, or you still got some question marks?
I was just wondering what sort of percentage it is reduced. What percentage is it's reduced if we do have the vaccine? What's the percentage that how reduced will it be? The chance that we will get COVID.
Dr. Muscat?
So in the absence of natural infection, so we just have vaccine, one dose of vaccine alone, then the vaccine efficacy in terms of preventing infection is in your sort of age group is about 50%. That's a preventing infection. Preventing hospitalization is higher. If you have the vaccine on top of natural infection, as in your case, if you had the vaccine, then that vaccine efficacy will go up to preventing infection, will go up to more than 80% and will gradually decline with time. What we don't know, as we were saying earlier, is the rate of waning of that immunity in young people. That is being studied. But if you have natural infection and vaccination, your immune system will be much, much stronger than if you either had natural infection alone or vaccine alone.
And when you're saying efficacy there, you mean like the effectiveness of your immune system?
Indeed, the effectiveness at preventing infection, the effectiveness at preventing hospitalization.
And the combination of having COVID and the jab would almost give you sort of a super ability to fight off the infection.
It is the best immunity to get, because it is not only very heightened, it is also very broad, because natural infection exposes you to a whole host of antigens and not just a small amount of antigen, which is all a vaccine can provide. And that's an important point to make. So although the vaccine is artificial because it's man-made, the virus gives you the man-made component, the spike protein, but also a whole host of other antigens at the same time. So it is very many man-made bits of antigen, but made by nature, given into you as an infection. That's what we're trying to avoid, which is why we go down the vaccination route.
Fine. Well, hopefully that gives you a bit of reassurance, Gabriel. Ollie, have you got another question for the panel?
I remember there was the rock-up or drop-in clinics that we had a few months ago, or was it last month or something like that, and they're restarting again. But I remember when I first looked at the timetable for where they were and which dates, the timings were great for after school, but the thing is that they were all in town. A lot of them were in town. In fact, I think most of them were in town. One of them was even at the sports centre outside Hollier, which is great for Hollier, not for many other schools. But I think it would be really great if it could be extended to some weekends. That would be done in different parish halls as well. I live in St. Juan, so it's pretty hard to get anywhere unless you have like a car or vehicle or anything like that. So even just like a van or a bus with some kind of, like you have the library bus that goes around to parishes, so, something like that, just so we can make it a lot more extensive, because some kids wouldn't want to have to book a whole vaccine thing on the thing. Maybe they just can't know, they don't know how to do it. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more spontaneous as well.
Okay, let's put that to Becky Sherrington. Any plans to roll out the pop-up clinics? I mean, it's a really good suggestion from Ollie there.
It is. They're quite slow, so that's the only thing at the moment.
What you mean, like the driver, or which bit's slow?
So the number of people you can get through a rock-up
Right.
is really quite small. So during the summer, as you say, we went to mostly in town, but we also went to down to the Kennervay, we went to the Bergamo along the front, that area there. So we've done a few around the island, but the numbers of people that can come through are really quite small. But you're right, as we've gone through the mass vaccine bit and trying to get as many people as quickly as we can, once we've stopped doing that, then it's time to think about actually where does it need to be? Are there other places? So that needs to be on the radar for the next couple of months. So I absolutely agree with you.
Mark Rogers, you're the man responsible for the schools, amongst many other things. What about a pop-up clinic in the playground during lunchtime, after school, before school? Could that be an option?
Well, I guess having listened to Becky's answer, it might be an option later on. I think there's a couple of other considerations that we've had as well here, which is, although it seems to have tailed off, there have been people who have actively kind of demonstrated against this, and as an education service, amongst other things, are concerned not to place children in a situation that might generate stress and anxiety, for example. So we've been cautious about thinking about that. I think also just kind of appearing over lunchtime in the playground, you know, getting your jab is not the same as all that goes on before and afterwards with these clinics, and it wouldn't be as straightforward as just rocking up into the playground, I suspect. We've also just wanted, I think, a point that Becky made earlier. This is it's a healthcare procedure. It's not just something that you do kind of anywhere. And I think the programme that's running at the moment is running where it is, because you're better able to have a controlled environment, and kind of eliminate all of those things that might just kind of cause either greater anxiety or a rush, you know, to kind of get out and finish things because playtime's nearly over and you've got to go back to lessons and stuff. So right now, it's not an option that we're thinking of putting in place. But again, just listening to you and listening to Becky talk earlier, it's not never, it's just not now.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, there'll be plenty of more youngsters willing to get the jab if it basically came to them, rather than expect the youngsters to go to the jab. Would that be a fair summary?
Yeah, if you're booking at Fort Regent, for example, not many people are willing to walk up there. And there's no buses, there's no tram, there's no even anyway. But you know, so convenience is really the key thing here, and getting the word out to people. And the minute you do that, I mean, you could see it go from sort of hear rates to hear rates. So yeah, that's my advice.
Fine. So we're hearing a bit more there about that communication to youngsters again.
And that's really right, because actually what you're saying is what the research says. So if you go to people, you get more vaccine uptake. So that's really right. That's a really good point.
Brilliant.
I think the other point Carl
Yes.
mentioned is we are talking about young people making an informed choice, and for them to take the time to make that decision and talk to their folks and to make it the decision that's right for them. And I suppose the danger of the easy access solution is that young people might not think through the whole thing properly. And so the benefit of having to go up to the fort and to make that appointment means that you have taken the time to read the information, listen to the voice of experts and others around you, and make that decision with your parents or your carers. So I think that's the balance. It's the balance between accessibility, but also it being a proper informed choice for you.
Which I suppose shifts that onus back towards the importance of communication to the island's youngsters. Taylor, did you have another question for the panel?
Will the vaccine ever become mandatory if the epidemic or pandemic becomes worse?
Dr. Muscat?
There is no intention at the moment to make the vaccine mandatory for any age group. It is something that some other countries have considered and some private firms have insisted upon, but in Jersey at the moment there is no indication that we will be going down that route.
Okay, are you happy with that, Taylor? Are you worried that it might have been something that you would have to have every year or every 6 months?
Well, I've had it, so it was just a case of like...
You've had what? You've had the jab or
yeah,
you've had COVID?
No, I've had the jab. It was just a case of like, if it would ever be like pressured, but no.
Okay, and where did you have the jab?
I had it at here, Fort Region.
At the Fort Region, and how did you go about it? Did you book it online? Did you have a discussion with your parents first?
We booked it online and we just discussed it, and we just kind of did it because I thought it would benefit me.
I mean, not trying to cause a row or get you into trouble, but I mean, was it your decision? Was it a family decision? How did you decide to get it?
It was both my decision. I mean, I wanted the vaccine because I thought it would benefit me, but it was partly my parents, but partly me, mostly me, because I wanted the vaccine. So.
And why was it important to you to have the vaccine?
Because I thought it would just make it, like, it would. Lots of people are having it, and lots of important people have had it. So I'm kind of trusting, like, the medical evidence, and I think it's just the pros, I believe, outweigh the cons, and I think it just benefits massively.
Right. Oh, that's a really useful insight there. Just one question that has come up a couple of times, and I thought maybe we should ask you, Dr. Hughes, if you could briefly just explain it. Something called the Gillett competency test. Could you just explain a bit about that? That's come up in a few questions. People might not understand what that's about.
Yeah, so that's essentially a judgment that we make, or is made about a young person's ability to make a decision for themselves. It's in that sort of 12 to 15 roughly age range where you start to become a little bit more able to be, make autonomous decisions that are a bit more complicated. And this is, choosing to have a vaccination or not, weighing up the risks and the benefits is one of the, is a classical scenario for Gillett competence to come into play. And if the provider, in this case, this is the people that are offering the vaccines are content that, so for example, if Gabriel came and he'd said, yes, I've considered the risks, and these are the risks as I understand them, and I'm happy that the benefits outweigh the risks, and he seemed to be of sound mind and wanting to go ahead, then we would, even though he was under 16, take his views seriously and provide him with the vaccination.
Deborah McMillan, do you endorse that?
Yep, absolutely. As young people, you have the right to make a decision. And even though your parent might, as an example, say they don't want you to have the vaccine, but you've looked at all of the information and you've made the decision that you want to have the vaccine, then they will be able to provide it to you. As long as Dr. Hughes says, you can demonstrate that you've understood the risks and that you can talk about how you've come to that decision. That's your right.
Becky Sherrington, I mean, I'm not asking you, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to name any specific numbers here, but have we had, or are you aware of anybody, any youngster this age who has turned up for the vaccine against the wishes of their parents?
No.
Right.
So, in a word, no. And I think that it's an individual case-by-case basis. So we really want to work with parents as well as young people. So
talk us through the process. If a youngster turns up at the fort and says, I want my jab, my mum and dad aren't happy about it, but I've gone out with my friends in town and I've decided to come up to the fort and get it, what's the process? Should they be worried or afraid to do that? Talk us through it.
So they should, the team at the vaccination centre have all been trained in Gilead competency. And the ethos should be that it's a partnership with you and your parents. So we would want to understand what conversations you've had so far, where you got your information from, why you wouldn't probably want to have a conversation with your parents. So it would be talking about the situation that you're in. So it would be by case basis.
Right, okay. But then will that discussion happen there and then and they'll get the jab, or is it likely to be, are they going to be sent away and go back home and there'll be an appointment booked and a discussion?
So it'd be a case by case.
Right, fine.
So
okay.
if it seems that a young adult has acted on a whim, and there are no problems to discuss it with the parents, then we would encourage them to re-attend and have a discussion with their parents. So it would be by case basis.
Fine.
Really.
But it might be possible they could also have the jab that day.
If there was strong, compelling evidence
Yep.
that it was in the child's best interest or the young adult's best interest and that they were Gilead competent, then the vaccination team would be able to assess that.
Fine. Right, well, thank you for clearing that up. Dr. Muscat, changing, obviously on the same subject, but changing the angle here. What if one of the questions that's coming on Slido, what if a child is well, they've got a cold, or maybe let's extend that. What if they're isolating or they're a direct contact or something like that? Can they still have the jab, or do they need to wait for all of that to clear?
Well, if they're isolating, they should continue in isolation and not venture out except for the sort of 2 hours exercise that they're allowed in non-crowded areas in the open air. If they're unwell, then it is our general view that you should postpone vaccination until you're well, so that amongst other things, you do not confuse the deterioration in the original illness with what is a coincident side effect from the vaccine, for example. So in order to allow for simplicity and straightforward conclusions about how an individual is doing, it's better to postpone the vaccine. Also, of course, you don't want, as we all know, there are some minor aches and pains with the vaccine. We don't want someone who's already unwell to feel slightly more unwell at the same time. So for all those reasons, isolation is continuing isolation. If you're unwell, don't have the vaccine, but once you're well, go for it.
Okay.
With COVID, if you're PCR positive, you do not want to vaccinate for 4 weeks after the PCR positivity.
Fine. Right. Well, thank you for that, Doctor. What we'll just quickly do now, if we can, panel members, is we better just do a bit of a quick fire round to attack some of the questions that have come in, because we've had some fantastic questions from our young audience members here, but we can see that there are still plenty of questions to ask. So if we can try and keep our answers brief, we can get through as many as possible. And if anybody watching wants a bit more detail, they can always email in or contact the team here, and we can try and get that for you. And forgive me, Dr. Muscat, I think many of these are going to be heading your way. The JVCI have not recommended a vaccine for children. Why should I send my child in for this, particularly when the risk is 0% for healthy children?
The risk for children is not 0%. The risk for children from COVID is palpable. JCVI measured this in terms of the risk in terms of the benefit from vaccination, in terms of how many hospitalizations, including ITU and the pediatric multisystem inflammatory disorder that Dr. Hughes was talking about earlier. And they estimated that to be about 200 per million children is a result of vaccination. That's what would be prevented. They also estimated that the number of cases of myocarditis seen with the first dose in 12 to 15-year-olds will be 10 per million. So there's a 20-fold benefit just using those numbers. But they felt that on that basis alone, they could not recommend universal vaccination for 12 to 15-year-olds on those health grounds alone. But they recognized that there were other benefits to the vaccine. They recognized that there were educational well-being, psychiatric benefits, which we all were worried about last year, earlier on this year as well. And they recognized that this fell outside their area of expertise, and they asked the 4 CMOs of the UK to discuss the matter with the College of Pediatrics, College of Psychiatry, College of GPs, College of Public Health, and the Academy of Medical Sciences to determine if, when taking the wider context into account, it was appropriate to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds. And the response was, yes, it was appropriate. So there is a risk, and if you take into account all the risks from COVID and the problems surrounding that and the direct risk from vaccination, the risk-benefit ratio is very much on the side of vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, which is exactly what they're doing in the United States, in Canada, in the European Union, Israel, and other countries.
Right, thank you. Talking of other countries, somebody said here that the other countries are giving their children 2 doses. Why are we only giving our children 1?
Because we want to approach this safely and carefully. And we are learning from what's happening in other countries. And on the basis of all that and our own experience, further decisions will be made about second doses and any boosters.
Right, thank you, Doctor. Dr. Hughes, this could be one for you. My child's very scared of needles, but wants to get the vaccine to do their bit for the community. What advice have you got for them?
Well, that's challenging. It's not that your child is. You're not unique.
Have the vaccine, I suppose.
Not at the moment. No, not to my knowledge. No, it has to be delivered intramuscularly with a needle at present. So I mean, if we had time and resources, we have a play therapist who sometimes works with young children, usually younger than 12, to try and get them used to the idea and distraction techniques and that sort of thing, which can help with blood testing and sometimes with vaccinations. I'm not sure, Becky, if there's anything else on offer for needle-phobic children and young people.
Well, I suppose, Becky, you might have encountered this in adults as well. So far.
Yes, we do. A lot.
How do you deal with that?
So the needle that it's given, it's the smallest needle available. So it's tiny, tiny needle. And to quote my daughter, when she had it, and she was not keen about having needles, she said, well, that was a bit underwhelming. It really is a tiny scratch, and you really cannot feel it. It's at worst would feel like a bee sting, but I would say that you don't feel it at all. It is a really minor scratch. It's a tiny, tiny needle, and by the time you've had it, you won't even realise you've had it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. Dr. Muscat, where is the peer-reviewed data showing that the vaccine is safe and effective?
So the data that there is coming out of various trials has been reviewed in depth, microscopically, by the various health authorities like the FDA in the United States, like Health Canada, like the MHRA in the UK, like the European Medicines Agency, like the JCVI, and they have whole teams looking at all the data, dissecting out the data, questioning the trialists to make sure that they can distill out and summarize the information that's available. And it is on the basis of the very careful dissection of the information that they make their recommendations. And the recommendations from the MHRA, for example, are that 12 to 15-year-olds should be vaccinated, similar to that from the FDA, Health Canada, the EMA, European Medicines Agency.
Okay, thank you very much. And just briefly, we know that we've already started to jab the children who are aged over 15, those sort of older teenagers and young 20s. Is there a plan to give them a second dose?
That seems to be on the cards, but a final decision has not yet been made. The evidence is still being sifted by the JCVI, and they will come back to us with a recommendation.
Right, thank you. Deborah McMillan, Children's Commissioner. There's a few questions here that base themselves really about, are we putting, I'll summarise them, are we putting children at risk by encouraging them to have this vaccine?
Well, let's make it clear that it's not my role to tell young people that they should have the vaccine or that they shouldn't have the vaccine. And I hope that the message that you've all taken away today is that it is about your choice. And it's really important that you've got that choice. Not all children around the world are being given the choice. And so go and find out, make sure that you access good quality information that's reliable, and so that you can make your decision. But my role in all of this, working closely with my colleagues around the table, has been to make sure that when the decision was made to give you that choice, that decision was made in your best interests as children and young people across the island. We're not, the vaccine is not being offered to you to protect other adults. It's being offered to you to protect you and all of your rights, to make sure that you can keep going to school, to make sure that you can keep accessing those after-school activities and weekend activities that you all enjoy, that keeps us all safe and well.
Thank you, Deborah. Mark Rogers, we touched on this briefly earlier. Somebody's asking here, are you planning to do anything about the anti-vaxxers? They were outside of school recently, and some of the messages that they're spreading, they're talking about children dying, children having heart attacks, those sort of things. Is there anything that can be done to stop that, or is that people's right to demonstrate?
So I think our position is really clear. People indeed have freedom of speech, although there are limits to that, as we know, for example, around hate crime and the like. Our preference is for that to occur in more appropriate places than outside busy institutions like schools, which are just trying to get on with their business. But as you will have seen from recent responses, actually, unless there's an infringement or worse of the law itself, then people have the right to free speech and to do that in ways that remain within the law. And I think that that's entirely appropriate, given that all of this evening's Q&A has been about giving information so that people can make decisions. And irrespective of my view of some of the messages that so-called anti-vaxxers give, part of the way we process life is by listening to all the different positions. Some may be evidence, some may be not, but as long as they're all within kind of legal bounds, and that we are not conducting ourselves in a way that discriminates or worse, then that is entirely appropriate that should occur. But from an education perspective, I think I said a little earlier this evening, I would prefer if those protests, if that's what we're going to call them, took place elsewhere, because actually I think it's important that children have calm and considered spaces in which to hear and think about the information that they're provided with.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, did any members of our audience see any of the protests recently outside of schools?
Yes.
You did? Stand up, Gabriel. What did you... I know you've got another question as well to ask the audience, but just briefly, what did that have an impression on you? Did it convince you one way or the other?
Well, I've seen it twice. I've seen it just outside Bowyer. Obviously, it's just past Vic, so... and I've seen it by the burger bar along the avenue.
What do you think when you see some of those messages?
Well, I definitely read them. They're very they're very good to take, obviously, the second side of having the vaccine or not having the vaccine, because we hear lots about how good the vaccine is. It's good to hear the things about how it's not so good for us.
Okay, so it kind of balances the argument
Yes.
in your view.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, do you have a final question that you want to ask the panel members?
Yes, I
Go
do. If any of you, if you have or had kids or grandkids, would they be having the vaccine?
Well, that's a really good question. Why don't we go around the panel, Deborah?
For sure, yes. I have children and I have grandchildren. And I think in listening to all of the advice and finding out all of the information, I would be recommending for them to have the vaccine.
Okay. Dr. Hughes?
Yeah, I've got I've got 3 boys. None of them are old enough yet to be offered a vaccine. Yes, if they were old enough, and I felt that they could come to a reasoned decision, then I would be having these conversations with them. But I think it's important that you don't make them I wouldn't make them feel like they had to, and I would give them the equal opportunity to say no. But I think the key thing is to give them the right information, and not present them with this false balance that you often get from the anti-vax community. And yes, give them accurate, reliable information.
Thank you. Dr. Muscat?
My children are sort of grown up now, so I don't have children in the 12 to 15-year-old age group. However, I wouldn't be recommending vaccination for that age group if I wouldn't recommend it to my own children or grandchildren if I had any. But I agree that it is an individual choice, so the information will be provided. If they ask for my opinion about whether I would recommend it or not, the answer is yes, but the decision is finally theirs.
Mark Rogers?
Yeah, entirely consistent with the other panellists. The days are long gone when I told my children anything, and they followed.
Hi.
But I think the whole spirit of this evening has been about have the information out there, have the evidence, have the assertion, and give people the opportunity to weigh it up. And I think I would be hypocritical if I said it was my view that I should instruct my children or my grandchildren. I have one grandchild who is old enough actually she's adult, so she's in that category anyway. And the whole conversation in our family has been about just understanding the risks, but also understanding the benefits. And on that basis, they are grown-ups. They make a choice.
Fine. And Becky, obviously we heard that your daughter's already experienced the jab.
Yes,
Was that on your instruction that she should have that jab?
No. So the 16-year-old turned up at the rock-up, so we got back from holiday. She was annoyed that we'd been on holiday when that started, so she came back and went to the rock-up in the square. So she had hers done in the summer, and then my 13-year-old, I had a discussion with her because she didn't want the needle. She was frightened about having a needle. So I had a discussion. She wanted the vaccine but was a bit frightened of the pain. So I attended the vaccine centre with her, and the nurse at the vaccine centre had the conversation with her to make sure she'd got the information, and she made the decision to have the vaccine. So definitely not, but they were both keen to have the vaccine.
Great. Right, well, thank you for that question, Gabriel. Thank you to all of our audience. Just before we end for the evening, can we just have a quick show of hands with the audience here? How many of you have decided you are going to have the jab? Okay, any of you absolutely not going to have it? And how many of you are unsure? Still undecided? Okay, fine. Well, that's a really interesting poll there on the back of tonight's discussion. So thank you to our audience. Thank you very much indeed to our panel members and our experts that have fielded the questions from the youngsters here and from you wherever you are watching. Apologies if we didn't get round to your question. I'm sure there are going to be plenty more of these events, and we will get through more questions as the vaccine programme continues to roll out throughout our community. But one thing we can certainly take away from tonight is that opinions are still divided. We will hopefully be seeing some more communication, which is what the children want to see. through the various platforms that they engage with, and the community as a whole, I think, is it would be fair to say is predominantly behind the vaccine programme, but there are still just those question marks over the youngsters. But whatever your view is at home and watching, we hope that tonight has really helped. Thank you for taking part in it, and we wish you a good evening.